What I want to do is make sure that we get a chance to talk to you about our speakers. We'll do a brief introduction to our speakers and then sort of dive in. We are excited to have Ms. Karen Washington, who is here today, and Dr. Cindy Leung. They're going to be leading our session this morning, and then I'm going to show up after them. Ms. Washington is going to talk about her experiences and her work with food insecurity in urban gardens. Dr. Leung is going to be focusing on food insecurity in the household, evaluating stress, scarcity, and caloric abundance. I'm going to follow that up and talk about clinical management. How do we sort of screen and intervene in the clinical spaces? And we want to make sure that we do that as well. We'll hold off on questions in the morning. When we come back in the afternoon for our afternoon panel at 1 p.m., we'll be able to ask all of the questions that you desire. What do we do in the meantime? Well, Ms. Hatfield is going to come around. She has these wonderful index cards ready to go with pens, high-tech pens ready to go. And she's going to pass them around. You take your notes, your questions, write them on there. She'll come back around and pick them up, and then we'll use those for our afternoon panel discussion. Again, we're excited to be able to do that as well with you all. In the panel discussion, we're going to add chef extraordinaire, Miss Emily Schlag, and she's going to join our conversation, and we'll be able to really have a rounded conversation in the afternoon to really dive deeper into these topics. So let me go ahead and introduce Ms. Karen Washington. Ms. Karen Washington, I heard and followed her work for years, and we're so excited that she agreed to join us this year. Ms. Karen Washington has lived in New York City all of her life, and recently transplanted, I don't know if I can say this, transplanted to Atlanta part-time. She has spent decades promoting urban farming as a way for all New Yorkers to access fresh and locally grown food. Ms. Washington has been a resident of the Bronx for over 26 years, although in 2015 she began living part-time in Orange County, New York, near the farm. Since 1985, Karen has been a community activist, striving to make New York City a better place to live. As a community gardener and board member of the New York Botanical Gardens, Karen worked with Bronx neighborhoods to turn empty lots into community gardens. As an advocate, she stood up and spoke out for garden protection and preservation. As a member of the Familia, Verde Community Garden Coalition, she helped launch a city farmers market, bringing garden fresh vegetables to her neighbors. She also co-founded Black Urban Growers, or BUGS, an organization of volunteers committed to building networks and community support for growers in both urban and rural settings. In 2012, Ebony magazine voted her one of their 100 most influential African Americans in the country. And in 2014, she was awarded with the infamous James Beard Leadership Award. Professionally, Karen was a physical therapist for over 30 years and retired in April of 2014 to start Rise and Root Farm. Without further ado, we would like to welcome Ms. Karen Washington.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, believe it or not, folks, I was a physical therapist back in the day. And so I got a chance to really, meet with my patients and look at the way food was influencing their health. And believe it or not, a lot of my patients were farmers, but yet they were succumbing to diet-related diseases such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and I felt that I needed to make a difference. Yes, I was a physical therapist. I loved my job. As a matter of fact, I was a thorn in a lot of my patients' back, because when I would go and see them as a physical therapist restoring function, I would say to them, I need to see your medication, and I need to go into the kitchen to open up the refrigerator and the pantry. And it was, Ms. Washington, why are you the therapist? I said, because I can't treat you. I can't treat you if you're eating food that is unhealthy. If you're a diabetic and you have the cookies and you have the sodas, or you're eating the ice cream, I can't treat you until I understand that you need to understand that the food that you're eating is killing you. So let's see. This comes up. The word is not coming up.
Yeah, I'm going to tap into experts.
Look, I can do the jumping slide. I don't need the slide. Okay, they're working. All right, so I have this. The urgency of growing food is no longer a local movement, but a global one. The aim for cities and countries is not to grow food to feed themselves, but to help build a food system in which all people are fed and hunger and poverty is no more. And I say that because I'm reminded that we live in the greatest country in the world where we grow enough food and we waste enough food, yet that food is not getting down to the people that need it the most. And we have a food system. We have a food system that is the haves and haves not. And when people say that the food system is broken and it needs to be fixed, I used to drink that Kool-Aid, but I'm challenging the food system. I'm challenging the food system. So I'm going to take you on a journey on how I got started in the food system and why food as medicine is so important. So, no disclosure or conflict of interest in words that I'm saying or the slides. So it starts with empty lots. Believe it or not, this photo was done back in the 1980s. But if you go around the country, there are still pockets of urban areas that have empty lots. And New York City at one time had over 15,000 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And if you can look at these vacant lots, you can see despair, hopelessness, and the impact it had on people in their community. But as there's resolved in a lot of us, most people with power and privilege left. They call it white flight. Those that remain got together and turned those empty lots into community gardens. And you can see the difference that a community garden and urban farm would make in a community that's devastated because they don't have access to healthy food. And so what are some of the ways that community gardens help neighborhoods? Well, it's about tradition, it's about culture. And I think what we've lost is the essence of agriculture. Understanding the word culture is missing. And so what these urban farms and community gardens do is talk about culture, talk about tradition, talk about inquiry, talk about intergenerational wisdom that's so important. And I say that because my relationship to food at one time was the fact that I got it from a grocery store and my mom was a good cook. My relationship to land was I will never go into farming because land was a stigma of slavery. And so getting kids, especially kids of color, into farming and understanding where their food comes from and understanding the historical content of agriculture is critical to their development. And so whenever there is land in any municipality, there's political consequences. And so throughout cities, whenever people try to come together to try to do something to benefit, politics get in the way. And so what we found out is that we have to be proactive instead of reactive. Even today, in urban areas where you're trying to balance green space with development, you continue to have to be proactive to make sure that land is preserved in these spaces, especially in spaces where people are food insecure. So the fact that advocacy and gardening goes hand in hand is very important. And so for me, being in my garden and working in my food, I started to realize that, wait a second, I just can't concentrate on food alone. Something's going on here because while I was in my garden, I was hearing some of the social issues that were impacting my community, social issues around unemployment, no jobs, social issues around health, limited access to food, limited access in terms of land use, also environmental issues such as asthma, health issues, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. And I realized that food alone cannot stand by itself, that it intersects all of these social issues. And so I said to myself, Karen, instead of working on trying to talk about things, become proactive. And so I left my profession as a physical therapist because I wanted to be actively involved in changing the food system. And so what I found out as a person of color, living in a low-income neighborhood, that the health disparities are driven by social and economic inequities. And I say that because, folks, when it comes to access to healthy food, it's hard to find a supermarket. When it comes to access to have a health system that's supposed to be treating everyone equal, well, it's divided between people who have Medicare and people who have Medicaid. First thing they ask is your insurance. And if you have Medicaid, you're seen in a clinic. Medicare or private insurance, you're seen by your physician. In terms of economic stability, again, people who don't have jobs cannot feed themselves, and it impacts their social life. And so if you look at all of these health disparities that are driven by social and economic inequity, it is driven through racial and discriminatory practices, without a doubt. We have a food system that's supposed to be fair and just and equitable for all, but we don't. We have a food system for the haves and a food system for the have-nots. And in this great country, we have to find a way that makes sure that everyone has equal access to food, to shelter, and to clean water. And so this is a friend of mine, Daphne Miller. She wrote a book called Pharmacology, and she wrote that book because she was looking at the food system as she was traveling along from farm to farm throughout this country and realized that something is wrong. There's something that's wrong with our food system and something's wrong with our gut. Why are so many people being sick? And why are so many people being ill? And she traced it back to the soil, and she traced it back to the soil and its influence in the gut. And what she found out is that, folks, we're a mess. We're eating food out of season. You know, just think, I'm in New York and I'm eating peaches and I'm eating cherries in December. Or the fact that I'm eating meat all year round, all types of meat all year round. And she found out that it was impacting our gut. What she also said is the importance of soil. And I like what she says about what food justice is. What the food justice movement is teaching us is that in marginalized communities and communities of color, they need to control the soil. In other words, they need to control their food system. And when there is an impact in the soil on how it is grown, or how it is prepared, or if it's sprayed with pesticides or insecticides, or if it's influenced by politics, it has an adverse effect not only on the farmer or the people that grow it, but on the community. And so what she says in essence is everything is related to soil. And so for me, some of the things that I have been working on, and a lot of us have been working on, we're not working in silos, but we're coming together to work on these three things: food justice, food sovereignty, and food apartheid. So let's start with food justice, because how many have heard that term food justice? I say it's being co-opted. Because if you think about food justice, the definition of food justice, the transformation of the food system to do away with the disparities that we often see. That word transformation means that it is an active movement and not a passive movement. So if you're working on food justice, you have to be actively working on dismantling the social injustices that you see. Social injustice around gender, around race, around trauma, around limited access to food, limited access to land. These are the things that you should be actively working on. Talk about food sovereignty, another term that people are using now because all of a sudden they know about food justice. So let me just bring it up another notch and talk about food sovereignty. Well, let's give credit where credit is due. Food sovereignty was founded in the global South. Peasants and farmers fighting for equity, fighting for self-governance, fighting for the right to own their land and fighting for the right to control their food. So when we talk about food sovereignty, it's for every individual to have that right to control the food that enters their body, to control access to land that they can control. And last is food apartheid. And I coined that term food apartheid because someone told me that I lived in a desert. I'm saying, wait a second, I live in a desert? You're saying I'm food desert? So you know how to call my homies and say, wait a second, in Chicago, in Baltimore, Oakland, we live in a desert? Outside a term that never lived in my neighborhood, know nothing about where I live, using that term to denote the fact that there's limited access to food or no supermarkets. And I said, we have food. We have the junk food. We have the fast food. We have the processed food. what we don't have are healthy food options. So I coined the term food apartheid because I want people to start thinking about the food system that's based on the color of one's skin, based on where one lives, and based on how much money people have. And start having those hard conversations so that we're going to change the food system. Then we need to ask ourselves, why in the greatest country in the world we grow enough food and we waste enough food? That food, again, is not getting down to the people that need it the most. And so, for instance, when I say that the food system is broken and it needs to be fixed, I say no. The food system is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's a caste system, haves and have-nots. And it's never worked for people. It's never worked for people in marginalized community until you realize in order for the food system to change, it has to shift with power. That change has to be shifted back. Power has to go back into the hands of the community. They have to be the ones that own it. They have to be ones to dictate exactly what they want, not what they need. What they need comes from a position of deficit. Asking us what we want comes from a position of power. So working on shifting the power dynamics of the food system back into the community so they have a chance to say exactly what they want. Everybody wants access to healthy food. Everybody wants that. But yet they're not positioned because we have a handful of companies dictating where our food comes from, dictating and controlling not only our food, but our water and our seeds. 7.8 billion people on this earth, and a handful of companies are controlling our food, our water, our seeds. Wake up! This is where we have to be very, very active in the movement if we want to work on food insecurity. And so I like this picture because food is medicine. Young people and people of color are starting to understand the essence of eating healthy. People say, you know what, oh, poor people, they just want the junk food. No. Give us healthy food. Give us access to food and we will come. And so you see people in urban areas that are growing food. You see health professionals starting to write prescriptions to encourage people to eat healthy. But it takes more than that. Because as healthcare professionals, you have to be part of the community. You have to ask those questions like, what are you eating? What's in that refrigerator? What's in that pantry? And I used to tell my patients, you know what? When you go see a physician, you make sure you write 10 questions. So that when he speaks to you or she speaks to you, they're making eye contact. They're not in the computer writing down things. They're making eye contact and they're asking those pertinent questions about your health and well-being. And we have to start talking about that and starting to integrate a lot of the services, especially in home care and health care, with dietitians and nutritionists as part of the assets of health care and dealing with our patients. And so, yes, food is medicine, and believe it or not, people are growing food in cities. No, not to feed the masses, no, but at least little children are learning exactly where their food comes from. And one thing that I found that's so ironic when I was a physical therapist is that many of my patients came from farms. They were farmers and they were gardeners, and they would say, Miss Washington, look at me. I grew up on a farm. I went out into the fields to get my food. I went out into the fields to get my medicine. But look at me now, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity. I have succumbed to a food system that is making me sick. And so what I try to do is to bring that thought back of going back to the land, thinking about going back into gardens, thinking about how it was to eat food that is healthy. But it starts with that conversation that we need to have with our patients and with our communities so that we understand that trauma runs through people who have for so long been oppressed. And you have to make sure that you have to understand that and take your time to, in essence, to get to know who these people are in a system, a food system that was not made for them. Oh, let me go back because I got to say something about this last slide with the bees. So I love this slide with the bees because at one time the health department in New York City said that the bees were ferocious animals. Okay, folks, if we don't have bees, we don't have food. So again, community correcting that, we need bees. So very important. And then talk about land issues. Land issues are very, very important because there is trauma in this country when we talk about land. There is trauma because the history is that this country was built on the backs of indigenous and enslaved people. And that as an African American, I had to learn the fact that my participation in this great country was not staying with slavery. The fact that my people were brought here because of their knowledge of agriculture, season their hair, to grow the food, the culinary experiences that we all have came from my ancestors. And when you tell black and brown people about their history, their American history, they want to go back to the land. They want to grow food. They want to be part of the American experience. And that is so important. So that's why now land is power. People want to go back to the land. They want to grow food in the land because they understand how powerful it is. Part of their legacy, part of their history, but not owning. And I hate the word owning because we don't live long enough to own anything. So I like to use the word, we're stewards of the land because we're stewards to make sure that we take care of land and food for the next generation. We don't own anything. We shouldn't think about owning anything. But we can say that we're stewards of the land so that the next generation will have food to grow. Y'all got me going. Next is entrepreneurship. And I say that because, let me tell you, I love the people in the food pantries and soup kitchens. I love y'all. But it's not sustainable. And I say that with heart. I say that with heart because in my community, you can go from Monday to Sunday to get free food. And that's what food pantries and soup kitchens weren't set up to be, emergency purposes. And not being inundated in communities of color as a way of giving out free food as a Band-Aid or making yourself feel good. And so what we try to instill in our communities is being self-sufficient and self-reliant. To think about entrepreneurship, to think about social capital and communal wealth. Because in order to get out of poverty, people want to be able to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, to eat healthy, to have a roof over their head, to be part of this American experience that we once were given of this promissory note, but was deemed insufficient funds. And so again, thinking about, especially young people don't want to volunteer anymore. They want to be paid. And the way they want to be paid is through entrepreneurship. Being part of the American experience. Knowledge is power. Getting people to understand their own agency. Why should they be eating good, healthy food? Getting them to read labels. If you can't pronounce it, why are you putting it in your body? Getting people to understand, asking questions when they go into the grocery store. Where did this food come from? Who grew it? Were the person or the people that grew this food, were they treated humanely? Was the food sprayed with pesticides or insecticides? This is what we're teaching people in our neighborhood, to start asking those hard questions, because knowledge is power, and we can't wait for government to do the work. Community, your jobs is to help people to understand, to ask those hard questions about their food. What has COVID done? One of the most positive things COVID has done is, before the vaccination, people started to realize that in order to be healthy and stay healthy, you have to eat healthy. So my phone and my email was off the hook. For the first time, people wanted to grow food. Front yard, backyard, windowsill, terrace, fire escape. The seed companies were going crazy because people started to understand, wait a second, in order to fight this deadly disease, we have to be healthy, and I want to eat healthy. And so people started coming together, growing more food, making sure people were eating healthy. One of the positive sides of COVID, opened up our community gardens and our urban farms so people to come in and get the healthy food that they needed, which was so, so important. What is the future? Well, urban agriculture is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. But what it can do is to teach community about the essence of growing food and eating healthy. And it may be a community garden. It may be a vertical wall. It may be a rooftop garden. It may be a greenhouse. But in essence, the value of our humanity is to come together so that everybody has a right to healthy food. And we don't have to think about hunger and poverty and homelessness and unemployment, but thinking about how, as humans, that we have the ability to feed ourselves in a way that is healthy and holistic. And so what it takes a lot of work, folks. It takes each and every one of us to be proactive instead of reactive. I don't need to hear about your plans, your ideas. I need to see the work that's being done, especially in communities of color and marginalized communities. Many of them cannot speak for themselves, but people in power and privilege can speak for them. This is America, the greatest country in the world. And we should ask ourselves time and time again, why do we have this problem of food insecurity, homelessness, and poverty? And so, for me, it's working on the next generation. The next generation are our children. The next generation who now understand food isn't grown in the grocery store, because now they're in the gardens and they're on their farms and they understand that putting seed in the soil is going to grow something that's going to nourish their body. And they're taking that information home to their parents and says, Mom, look what I did. I grew some carrots and let's eat some carrots. It's very, very important, because the average age of a farmer here in the United States is 62 years of age. And if we don't start having those hard conversations about farming, I wish all of you were farmers. Maybe you think about leaving your profession to become a farmer like me, but that's another thought. But thinking about farming as a tool, as a weapon of resistance to help feed our population. And so here, my friends, throughout the country that are working in small lots, urban farms, vertical farms, CSA, farmers market, food share, trying to do a little bit to feed their families. And here are groups that are being proactive instead of reactive, marching to make sure that everybody hears about the inequities that we have in this country, and fighting for the right for all to have adequate access to what we think about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country. Everybody wants that. And for me, one of my passions is starting this Black Farmer Fund. Started this Black Farmer Fund because in New York State, out of 57,000 farmers, only 139 are Black. And so how do we help those farmers to have an impact within their community, to serve their community in such a way, but also how do we do it within community so that the community has the power, the investment, and control of their food system. The most important part of this is the educational component of financial education and literacy, so that when people do have jobs and they do feed their families, the investment stays within the community, and the community thrives on the knowledge and the ability to feed their own selves. And so here I am, 6 acres up in Chester, New York, farming on 2.5 acres, growing food. Yes, my body is tired, my bones ache. But at the end of the day, when I sit back and I look at this land that I'm on, that I'm stewarding, that I gave it up, I traded my Metro card for tractors so that I could feed the people in my community that needed the most. Yes, I love my job as a physical therapist. I was a great physical therapist, but I saw a need to do something, how minuscule it was, but to do something to help feed a community. And so here I am. My name is Karen Washington. I tell people I grow food. I feed people body, mind, and spirit. Thank you so much for having me, and listen to what I have to say.